Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into one of the most incredible stories in history, pulled from the book of Acts. It's really the story of a world-changing movement, born out of what should have been a total catastrophic failure. Let's get right into it. Everything really boils down to this one question. Just think about it for a second. You've got this tiny group of followers. They're confused, they're scared, their leader has just been publicly executed by the most powerful empire in the world. By all logic, this whole thing should have been dead on arrival. So how on earth did it not only survive, but explode into the global faith we see today? To really get the scale of what they pulled off, we have to go back to the very beginning, back to Jerusalem, where the mission looked less like a long shot and more like, mission impossible. These guys were absolutely shattered. And this quote right here, it tells you everything you need to know about what they were thinking. Their hope wasn't for some spiritual savior of all humanity. Not at all. They were expecting a warrior king, a Messiah who would finally kick out the Romans and put Israel back on top. So the crucifixion, it didn't just kill their friend. It completely vaporized their entire understanding of the future. So, for this to work, a huge pivot had to happen, a seismic shift. See, Israel's historic mission was always centripetal. Think of it like a magnet, an inward-pulling force. The whole idea was for Israel to be such a shining light that other nations would be drawn to it. But the new mission? It was the exact opposite. It was centrifugal, an outward-pushing force. Now they were being told to leave the center and go out, taking the message with them. This was a 180-degree turn from everything they knew. And right away, this new go-out mission slams headfirst into a giant brick wall. And that wall was the massive cultural and religious divide between Jews and, everyone else, the Gentiles. And to really get why this was such a big deal, we have to understand what this word, Gentile, meant back then. It wasn't just, a label for someone who wasn't Jewish. It was packed with this idea of deep separation. For many devout Jews, just setting foot in a Gentile's house or sharing a meal with them was thought to make you ritually unclean. This wasn't just a social awkwardness, it was a hard spiritual line in the sand. Which brings us to this wild, pivotal moment for one of the movement's top leaders, Peter. He has this crazy vision. A giant sheet comes down from the sky, and it's full of animals that his religion had forbidden him to eat his entire life. Then a voice tells him, "Kill and eat." And Peter, being a good, devout Jew, is horrified. He says, "No way, I've never eaten anything unclean." And then comes the punchline, the rebuke that would change the world. What God has made clean, do not call common. And suddenly, the light bulb goes on for Peter. He gets it. The vision wasn't really about food at all. It was a metaphor. It was God telling him that the real uncleanliness was the human prejudice that kept people apart. This was a theological earthquake. The message was clear. God doesn't play favorites. This movement was for everybody, not just one ethnic group. Okay, but you know how it is. You solve one huge problem, and it just creates another, sometimes even bigger one. As soon as the mission started reaching Gentiles, it sparked this massive identity crisis inside the movement itself. It forced them to ask, who are we really? And what does it actually take to belong here? The debate was fueled by a group that history calls the Judaizers. These were Jewish Christians who basically said, that's great that Gentiles want to join, but if they want to be truly saved, they have to become Jewish first. And that meant getting circumcised, following all the laws of Moses, the whole deal. For them, faith in Jesus simply wasn't enough. So this all leads to a massive high-stakes showdown in Jerusalem. On one side, you have the Judaizers. Their argument is basically faith plus the law. You have to become culturally and ethnically Jewish. On the other side is Paul, and he's arguing for a totally spiritual covenant. He's saying, nope, it's faith alone. Gentiles and Jews are totally equal in this new thing. No one has to become something they're not. In the end, the council sided with Paul, and it's almost impossible to overstate how huge this was. This was the moment. This was the movement officially planting its flag and declaring, we are not just another sect of Judaism. We are something new, a universal faith. The door was now wide open to anyone. not through rules or heritage, but simply through grace. With that huge internal fight finally settled, the mission just explodes outward. But winning the internal battle meant it was now time to face the external one, a hostile world that saw this fast-growing faith as deeply dangerous and subversive.
And you can see the relentless pace on this timeline, mostly led by the Apostle Paul. First, he's pushing into modern-day Turkey. Then he crosses a major barrier, taking the message into Europe for the first time. Then a massive 3-year campaign in the pagan heartland of Ephesus. I mean, the momentum is just building and building. And then it all grinds to a halt. Paul, the main strategist, the driving force behind all this, gets arrested.
And what's so fascinating is how it happened. His arrest was partly triggered by some really bad advice from his own team, the church leaders back in Jerusalem. They were still nervous about how radical Paul was, so they told him to perform a Jewish ritual to sort of prove he was still one of them. The source material we're looking at is incredibly blunt about this. It calls the advice the fruit of cowardice. It's just a raw reminder of the human fear and the political games that were happening even at the very top. Well, that cowardly advice, it backfired, big time. Paul gets arrested, and he ends up spending the next 5 years as a prisoner. 5 years. Can you imagine? The core visionary and leader of this whole enterprise is just gone, taken right off the board. This, right here, this should have been the end of the story. And yet, it wasn't. In one of the great ironies of all time, the story doesn't end in a prison cell. The final chapter brings us to this absolutely stunning and honestly pretty unexpected climax. These are the last words, the very last words of the book of Acts. And I want you to focus on that final phrase, without hindrance. After everything, the riots, the shipwrecks, the internal fights, the political plots, after the main leader gets locked up, the story ends on this incredible note of absolute, unstoppable victory. The symbolism here is just everything. Paul is under house arrest in Rome, the capital of the empire, the very heart of the power that killed Jesus. He's literally in chains, and yet the book says his message is being proclaimed boldly, openly, and without hindrance. The messenger was in chains, but the message was free. By bringing it to Rome, the mission had symbolically reached the ends of the earth. So that's what we're left with. This incredible story of a movement that stared down its own internal divisions, that faced crushing external pressure, and still managed to redefine itself and spread across the known world. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does this story tell us about what it really takes for any idea, any movement, to truly change the world? That's something to think about. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.